Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Garage. I am still Scott Walters, and today we're going to do something fun. We've got a mystery to solve. This 500-pound mystery right in front of me. All I know about it, it is a small block Chevrolet, and it is said to be a good running engine. But that is it, all right? So I picked this up with a bunch of other parts that I picked up to sell to fund old Project Brutus here. That's our 1987 F350 crew cab diesel dually field fine 4x4 conversion project truck, all right? So before I sell this engine, though, I really should figure out what's going on, all right? Is it frozen? Is it a 350? Is it a 283 or is it a junk 305 or 307 that nobody really wants, you know? And, you know, I think as is, what I've got here, without any description, you know, small block Chevrolet said to be strong running, I think this is a $150 lump, all right, on your local Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, or whatever. All right, but I think there's probably some more meat on the bone there if we spend an hour or two figuring out exactly what it is, all right? And I figured I'd take y'all along for the ride. Okay, folks, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Here in the Bulletproof Garage. Okay, a quick walk around here. It's got some aftermarket stuff on it. It's got Moroso valve covers. It's got an Edelbrock dual plane aluminum intake manifold. So that's a hint, you know, that this engine may have been built up at some point. But it's had a Craigslist rebuild. This is not a fresh rebuild. Look at the fresh paint inside the exhaust ports there, all right? And you can see that while the intake manifold itself is filthy, there's some fresh paint on it, all right? So, you know, again, a rattle can rebuild is what we're dealing with here. Okay, next we're going to check the rear of the block and get the block casting number, all right? And that's a number that ends in 010 for this particular engine. So, and this commonly called a 010 block. I know you can't see the one very well here, but it's also cast into the side of the block on both sides. In doing a little research, a 010 block is a 350 block, but it can have either 2-bolt or 4-bolt mains, which we'll talk about shortly. Okay, now moving to the front of the engine, we're going to look at the pad, all right? So this pad has the engine code, and you can decode that to tell what the original application of the engine is. And that is important. In decoding this, what we have, I believe, is a late 70s truck motor. And that's good news. A truck motor generally came with a 4-barrel carburetor, all right? And that will give you the better cylinder heads, the 194, 150 heads, all right? Vice the power pack heads, which I think came with a 172 intake valve and just really not very valuable. In addition, a truck motor gets you 4-bolt mains. And 4-bolt mains are stronger than your typical 2-bolt main engine, and they're more valuable, and they give you a stronger foundation for a performance build. All right, folks, this is where things got really interesting and kind of fun. All right, as I moved to the back of the engine to look at the crankshaft flange, I noticed that it didn't look like a 350 crank flange because I'm familiar with those. All right, I had to consult a diagram that you can find online for 350 or small block Chevy crank flange identification and confirmed what I thought. This is a 400 crank, all right? Time out, stop. Okay, folks, look, I hate to do this, but I got to break in and ruin the surprise. Our host has convinced himself that he's got a 400 crank in a 350 block. That makes a 383, and the dollar signs are adding up, and he's getting all excited, but he's wrong. So, at the risk of ruining the surprise, I just had to let y'all know because he's going to go down a rabbit hole, all right? He's going to get his bubble burst soon, and that's going to be fun to watch. But I didn't want to confuse anybody, so I had to jump in and let y'all know. Now, in his defense, 400 cranks and 350 cranks have very similar crank flanges. What he really should have been looking for, when I say he, I mean I, should have been looking for is a dowel pin. The 400 crank flange has a dowel pin. The 350 crank flange does not. Also, I was looking at something online that really applied to early motors, pre-74. And this one is 79, give or take a year, right? So, again, if you hear references to a 383 in the video, that's why. All right, now back to the video. What else can we tell? We can tell that this was in a manual transmission car because it has a pilot bushing here, all right? And we can also tell that it is a cast iron crank, not a forged crank. It's difficult to see, but there is a parting line right here on the crankshaft. So you'll have a parting line here, and there will be one directly opposite to it on the other side. And a thin parting line, this is about 1/8 of an inch wide, all right? A thin parting line is indicative of a cast iron crank, all right? And that's the mark that was made when it was cast. A forged crank will have a parting line that is much wider, you know, maybe 1/2 inch wide or so. And not as pronounced right here on the edges, all right? So a wider and perhaps smoother parting line indicates a forged crank. No, a forged crank is more desirable because it's stronger. Okay, about the only other thing that I can look at before I do some disassembly is the date code of the block. All right, in a small block Chevrolet, it's right back here at the rear of the engine where the bell housing is going to bolt up, and I really can't make that out. All right, it looks like I've got 3 different digits there, letters and digits, but I don't know what that is other than that appears to be an 8. So we're just going to move on. Okay, now I'm just going to pop off the oil cap here and take a peek inside and see what I see. All right. Now, all I'm looking for is what type of rocker arms I have. With the oil cap off, the only thing I can tell right now is that it doesn't have roller rocker arms, you know, a little disappointing. I was hoping that a 383 would have some roller rockers, but it doesn't. That really doesn't change our value, but it doesn't increase it, all right? Let's continue. All right, let's get the valve covers off now and see what casting numbers the heads have. Okay, as expected, we've got stamped steel rocker arms, so no big deal. Yeah, it's a little dirty under here, but it doesn't look terrible. There's not a lot of sludge. The casting numbers right here, all right, and it looks like an 887. So you generally refer to cylinder heads, at least small block Chevy, as the last 3 numbers. So these are 487 heads. That doesn't ring a bell with me, so I'll have to do a quick Google check, all right? You can also see you've got head bolts here and not head studs. You know, head studs would have been preferable, but head bolts are no big deal, all right? And let's look at the valve springs. Okay, and looking at the valve springs here, it looks like you've just got a regular single spring valve spring with a damper in there. So that's not a double spring, that's a damper, all right? So, you know, may still be aftermarket valve springs, but they're not, you know, super high performance valve springs like you'd see maybe if you had a roller cam in there. Okay, so we've got a lot of really good information right now, but in order to figure out a little bit more about the engine and hopefully increase its value, we got to continue with the disassembly, all right? So we're going to take off the crank pulley. All right, let's get the water pump off. Okay, let's get the harmonic balancer off. So I've got a puller for that. Okay, that's off. Okay, timing cover coming off next. All right, we've got some more good news. We have a double roller timing chain, all right? You can see there's one roller here and one roller here, all right? And you've got two gears, all right, on the camshaft and on the crank side by side. So that's a double roller. So the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and get the gear off here so we can see if it's an aftermarket camshaft. Now this should just slide off, and it did. All right, let's see if we can get the gear out. Okay, well, I was hoping to see some numbers stamped in the end of the camshaft here indicating that it was an aftermarket camshaft, you know, comp cams, you know, 274 hotel or something like that, right? But I'm not seeing anything. It doesn't mean it's not an aftermarket camshaft. It just means we may need to do a little bit more digging, all right? Let's talk about these cylinder heads a little bit more. So these are casting number 487, right? And then there's the date code, H181. So H is the month, all right? So H is the 8th letter in the alphabet, so that corresponds with the 8th month of the year. So that is August, all right? 1/8 is the date they were cast, so August 18th, and the 1 is the year. So these were cast on August 18th, 1971. Now these are smog era heads, all right, the 487 castings. But they're open chamber heads, 75 to 76 cc chambers, generally thought to be good cylinder heads, all right. And so with the date code of 1971 and this engine being dated 1978, these heads are not original to the block. You know, more of an indication that, you know, this is sort of a performance build. Somebody may have sourced, you know, better head castings than what came with the block, all right? So that's more good news. They would have come with 194 and 150 valves from the factory, all right? And so that's not the best, but somebody may have installed 202 valves on down the line, all right? In order to find that out, we've got to remove the cylinder heads, and that's our next step. And first step is getting the intake manifold off. So let's get moving. All right, so we've got the number on the Edelbrock intake manifold. It's a 2101. I'm familiar with that number. I just assume it just means that it's a regular dual plane small block Chevrolet. You know, it doesn't look terrible in here. You know, there's not a bunch of sludge like you'd see in an engine that never got the oil changed. You know, it's obviously been run. It's not a fresh rebuild. But there's not a whole lot that we can tell at this point. Getting the intake manifold was really just necessary so we can get the cylinder heads off, okay? All right, continue with the disassembly. We're just going to back off the rockers a bit so we can get the push rods out. Okay, now that I've got the intake manifold off, I wanted to check to see if the heads had been ported. Normally when you're going to port cylinder heads, you're at least going to port this area right here to gasket match them to the intake manifold. And these heads haven't been ported, so this is a little bit of a rough surface. And if they had been ported, it would be smooth, okay? So not bad news, but not good news either, all right? So we've got unported cylinder heads. Now, it's still possible that the bowls were ported, but we won't be able to tell that until the cylinder heads are off. Okay, let's go ahead and get the cylinder heads off, and I've got to get the head bolts out. I think there's about 17 of them. My preference is to do this in reverse order and by hand, at least to start, instead of just going one at a time and buzzing them off with an impact. You know, there are folks that say that you could potentially warp your heads by doing that, so it just takes a few more minutes to do it this way. And on a small block Chevy, you generally start at the outside and work your way in. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to you go from side to side, and I'm going to give it about, at most, a quarter of a turn on each head bolt. All right, now that they're broken loose, I'm just going to go ahead and buzz them off. And I want to show you something I just noticed. Some of y'all may have noticed it earlier, but all right, check that out. It's stamped Manly. So these are aftermarket head bolts, more indicative of a performance build, all right? So more good news. All right, see if we can go ahead and persuade this guy to come off. I think we can. It's a nice thing about small block Chevrolet stuff. It's not too heavy. Whoa! What is going on there, man? Look at all that mess. Look at all that junk in there. I can't really tell what that is, but I know that I wouldn't want it in my motor when I fired it up. I don't think that's rust. If it's rust, it'd be metallic. So this is metallic, right? So these things, well, yeah, some of them are metallic. So I guess that is some rust. Interesting. Okay, before we do anything else, let's vacuum up this mess. Okay, now I have not turned the engine over yet. I mean, I'm assuming it'll turn over, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to scar up the walls of the cylinders unnecessarily if any of the rings are hung up. So I'm just going to hit it with some special sauce here. All right, this is Aerocroil. I'm a big fan of this stuff. And I'm going to let this sit for a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to come back with some additional special sauce. Okay, now I'm going to rotate the engine so I drain all the coolant out. But rotate the engine so this stuff has a better chance at seeping in. All right, and then I'll do the same to the other side. Okay, now I'm going to take some Marble Mystery Oil and just pour a little bit in each cylinder. Again, I don't think that this engine is seized, but I want to give it the best chance possible to turn over without scarring up the cylinders or causing any damage. Okay, well that's marinating. Let's go ahead and measure the bore. As a reminder, a 350 has a 4-inch bore, so this is either likely 4020, all right, so a 20 thousandths over bore if it's not 4 inches. I think it's probably 4030, so all right, I'm getting 4.025, and that is thrown off because of this carbon right here that's right at the top of the cylinder. That's obviously where the compression ring doesn't ride all the way up there. So I'm just going to take a snap gauge or telescoping gauge and get right under that area and see if I can get a better measurement. All right, obviously if you don't have a snap gauge, you just clean the carbon off. It'll take maybe 30 seconds with a Scotch-Brite pad and some WD-40. All right, so now that I've got my snap gauge measurement, let's see what the calipers say. All right, I'm getting 4.029 and a half, all right? So, in other words, 30 thousandths, right? So 4.030 is a block that's been bored 30 thousandths. So that's what we got here. That's kind of what I expected. All right, now I just wiped the top of this piston off and I've got some more information, all right? Oftentimes the size of the piston, the part number, maybe the manufacturer is stamped in the top of the piston, and here we just have a 30, all right? And that's pretty simple. That means that this is a 30 over piston, all right? So this piston is 0.030 inches oversize. So in order to figure out if the piston is cast or forged, who manufactured and such, we'll have to wait till we get the oil pan off and see if there's a part number and or a manufacturer on the bottom of the piston. All right. Now, what else can we tell about the block now that we've got the cylinder heads off? Well, we've got more good news, all right? If an engine is worn out, you're going to have a really sharp ridge that you can feel with your fingernails right here, all right? That's where the top compression ring stops in its travel. The top ring does not travel all the way up to the deck. It stops maybe a quarter of an inch short. All right, and if it's had a lot of wear in the cylinder, you will have a sharp ridge there, all right? And so that's what you'll see when folks pop a cylinder head off and they reach right there immediately with their fingernail. And if there's a ridge, it's probably going to need to be bored out. If there's no ridge, you're probably good. You're better to check that on the thrust side, by the way, all right? So perpendicular to the center line of the crankshaft where your cylinder is going to see more wear, okay? So no ridge here means good news. All right, now I've got the balancer bolt reinstalled, so let's see if the engine turns over freely. There it goes. Just make sure you go through a full revolution there. All right, don't appear to be any issues. All right, next step, let's get the fuel pump off, and then we'll get the camshaft out. All right, now the camshaft should slide out without any trouble. Well, it's got some numbers on the end. Let's see, you're not going to be able to see that because it's pretty faint. I've got Charlie 1 Hotel 290-S as in Sierra. All right, let's go ahead and get the oil pan off. All right, doesn't look bad. All right, it started raining, so we're moving inside, and we're gonna go ahead and remove one of the piston and rod assemblies and see what we've got. It's a pretty simple process. Once you get the nuts off, then you just need to go ahead and tap the piston down a little bit. All right, I like to use just an old wooden dowel. All right, now you got your rod cap off. Should come out with your bearing as well. Inspect the bearing. It's in pretty good condition, although I do see a scratch on it. All right, so there's a little bit more information that you can glean here. All right. Now, if you look on the bearing, you see where it says 010? Well, that means that the crank has been ground 10 thousandths under, and you've got the appropriate size bearings to fit it, okay? So just another data point. The bearing itself doesn't look terrible. Doesn't look great, doesn't look terrible. I'm not a big fan of the scratches that I see right here, but you know, this thing needs to be disassembled, cleaned, reassembled with new rings and bearings and gaskets and such. All right, from here you just continue tapping. I like to put my knee on the bottom right here where it's going to keep the piston from dropping to the ground. All right, you also want to keep an eye on your rod bolts and make sure they're not riding on the crankshaft as you're tapping it out, okay? All right, here it comes. And let's see what else we can figure out here. I'm not seeing a part number. Well, no, there is a part number. All right. I'm getting a part number on the piston, it looks like. All right, you're not going to be able to see that on the camera. There's something stamped in here. It's a 1436, and below that there's an 87. So that's what's cast into the piston. So I'll just go hit Google here in a second and see if that comes up with anything. Looking at the rod journal, it looks fine. I can feel a little bit of roughness here. It needs to be redone. Skirts look pretty good. The machining marks are still present. All right, they're not all scuffed up. So these pistons should be fine to reuse with just some cleaning up and some new rings. All right, folks, I just had my bubble burst. After getting the oil pan off and looking at the casting number on the crankshaft, this is a 350 crank. All right, so the casting number is 3932442. That's a 350 crank. It's not a 400 crank. So this is not a 383. It's a 355. It's a 350 that's been bored 30 thousandths, okay? So, not terrible news, but dadgummit, I got excited when I thought I had myself a 383, and I started seeing dollar signs. But I relied on a document that may have been accurate for early engines, but it wasn't accurate for later engines. So this engine, I think, is a 78 model. And in 78, you know what? The crank flange on the 350 looked a lot like the crank flange on a 400, all right? So check your casting numbers, folks. Don't get all excited by what shape the crank flange is. All right, so a little bit more digging on the pistons. So these are Silvalite. The part number is 1436. They are cast pistons. They are not the more desirable forged pistons. They are 4030 on the bore, okay? The rods appear to be just factory rods that have been, likely reconditioned. I think they may have aftermarket rod bolts, I'm not sure, but they're nothing special. So, this is a decent little street engine for somebody. The camshaft is the grind is a Charlie 1 Hotel 290-S, all right? And the H, the hotel, indicates it's a hydraulic grind. The S at the end of that just indicates it's not the original grind. The original grind would have been an Alpha, and a later grind would have been a Sierra. So it's a 290 advertised duration, likely a split pattern cam. It may have a little bit more duration and lift on the exhaust. Lift somewhere around 450-ish, all right? So this is just a little hotter than an RV cam. So good piece of gear. I haven't given it a detailed inspection. I don't know. I probably wouldn't reuse it, but, might be worth taking a chance on. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention, this engine does have 4-bolt main caps. We pretty much figured that out once we realized it came from a 1978 or so truck motor. Truck motors, again, normally come with 4-bolt main caps. So here is your main cap, 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts, all right? So a total of 4 bolts gives you 4-bolt main caps. Your block is a little bit stronger than your 2-bolt main block is, all right? So that's good news. Okay, last thing that we want to do is go ahead and verify that the cylinder heads are what we believe them to be. You know, just stock open chamber 194, 150 heads, all right? Now, I can look at the distance in between these two valves and tell you that that is a 194, 150 valve setup, all right? Because if they were 202 and 160s, you know, I remember from my days of junkyarding back in the 80s, you know, searching for 202 heads, which you rarely ever found. But if you did find, the valves were almost touching each other, all right? But, you know, since apparently I'm not immune from making mistakes, especially today, and especially with this engine, let's go ahead and get a measurement, all right? Okay, yeah, I just got 194 and 1,000th, all right? So 1.941, which is 194, okay? And on the exhaust valve, should be 150, and yeah, boom, right there. I got 150 and 5,000ths, right? But that's 150, okay? So 194 and 150 valves, which is what we expected. And, you know, if I was, had a lot of free time, I'd disassemble them and magnaflux them and CC the chambers, check to see if the deck was flat. You know, that stuff takes time though, and I think I have probably culminated at this point. Okay, folks, so let's review the bidding. When we started this fiasco, this adventure a few hours ago, what we had, I figured, was a $150 lump of something. An orange something that was likely a small block Chevrolet, all right? We didn't know whether it was a 400, a 305, 307, 350, you know, and yeah, I got excited and I made a mistake and I thought it was a 383, okay? Sorry, you know, I make mistakes. Just ask my wife, she'll tell you. So it is a 350 that's been bored 30,000. So it's a 355, right? The good things, hey, it's got 4-bolt mains. Yeah, it's a cast crank with stock rods, but this stuff is fine for a moderate power level. You know, this is a nice little street motor. Maybe 360, 370 horsepower. If you put it back together with new rings and bearings and obviously new gaskets, you know, you could reuse the camshaft. That's a nice little camshaft, probably going to give you a little rumpity rump as well. So nice little street motor. You know, what else is going for it? It's got an aluminum dual plane intake manifold, all right? The rods appear to be reconditioned. I'm not sure if those are aftermarket rod bolts or not. You know, the pistons are aftermarket, flat tops, yeah, they're cast, but hey, no big deal, all right? The cylinder heads are good heads. You know, they're smog era, open chamber heads, but as far as smog era stuff goes, these are pretty good, all right? Yeah, you know, you can throw some aluminum heads on there, you can throw some Vortec heads on there, you can put a roller cam in it, but man, I tell you what, you could slap this thing back together with new rings, new bearings, new gaskets, you get a dingle ball hone, and you break the glaze on the cylinder walls, and you got a really inexpensive, good street motor, okay? And I'm just going to go ahead and sell it. And I think what we've got here is probably a $400 motor, all right? You know, you may think it's worth more than that, but guess what? Small block Chevrolet stuff is everywhere these days. Everybody wants an LS motor, all right? There are still folks that are running small block Chevy stuff, and I think $400 is a good deal for myself and for the buyer. All right, so that's what's going to happen to it. It's going to end up on the market. I suspect it'll be gone here pretty soon. All right, so I'm pleased to report that this story has a happy ending. I sold the entire engine and I threw in an HEI distributor, a few starters I had, and an alternator and alternator brackets as well, and I think a water pump pulley. Anyway, the whole kit and caboodle went for $250 to a local kid, a 16-year-old kid who's building a C3 Corvette. I want to say it's a 78 with his dad in their garage. And this is the perfect starter motor, all right? It's very budget friendly and it won't take a whole lot to get it on the road and making some respectable power. So David, if you're watching, best of luck to you with the build. Holler at me if you got any questions. Okay, back to the video. All right, and that's a wrap on this episode. Folks, this was fun. It was ups and downs when I thought I had a 383, and then when I realized it was a 350. But hey, it's par for the course, right? You know, it was an interesting and fun, you know, mystery. And now that we've got it all figured out, it's time to move on to bigger and better things. So, hey, in between episodes, you can always find me on social media. I'm on Instagram at the.bulletproof.garage. I'm on Facebook at The Bulletproof Garage. Folks, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Bulletproof Garage.